bill introductions. Do we have any requests for bill introductions? Representative Potter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Introduce RS number 1459, which would lower the property tax on ATVs from 30% to 5%. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Committee, any questions? Any objection? Seeing none, the request is approved. Chair recognizes Representative Estes. Might make sure your mic is on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to introduce 21 RS 1446, a bill phasing out the sales tax on food.
Thank you, Representative. Committee, any questions? Any objection to the request? Seeing none, the request is approved. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Are there any other further requests for bill introductions? Seeing none, we will continue on to the first business item on the agenda and open the hearing on House Bill 2317. And I would first turn to the Revisor's Office for an overview of House Bill 2317.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2317 provides a tax credit for tax years 21, 22, and 23 against the income, privilege, or premium tax liability. This would be an amount equal to 75% of the expenditures incurred in the placing into service a qualified alternative fueling station during the tax year. The total amount of credits allowed for each tax year shall not exceed $4 million for tax year 2021, $8 million for tax year 2022, and $12 million for tax year 2023. The credit is not refundable. However, it may be carried forward against future tax liability for the next succeeding 4 tax years. And lastly, the term qualified alternative fueling station is a defined term under the bill. It means a metered for fee, public access recharging system for motor vehicles propelled in whole or in part by electricity. It does not include a building and its structural components. It must be new and must not have been previously installed or used to refuel vehicles by any means. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sievers. Committee, any questions for the Revisor? Seeing none, thank you for that overview. Or Representative Clayton, did you? Okay. Sorry, I saw a hand up. I didn't know if that was. Thank you. Okay, at this time we'd turn to Department of Revenue to review the fiscal note.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, this is Kathleen Smith with the Department of Revenue. House Bill 2317 would decrease state general fund revenues. However, we did not have data on the number of electric charging stations that would be placed into service. Therefore, we did go with the cap limitations that were provided in the bill. So House Bill 2317 has the potential to reduce state general fund revenues by $4 million in fiscal year 2022, $8 million in fiscal year 2023, and $12 million in fiscal year 2024. With that, I would stand for questions.
Thank you, Kathleen. Committee, any questions on the fiscal note? Seeing none, we will begin our proponent section of the hearing. And first, welcome to committee, David Jankowski, founder and president of Francis Energy. Welcome to committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is David Jankowski. I'm the founder of Francis Energy. Here in support of Bill 2317, which is similar to an Oklahoma statute, which we used to build out the Oklahoma network over the last 2 years. It's a pleasure to be back in front of the committee. We were here last year. Unfortunately, COVID hit, and so we're back here again this year. So thank you very much for inviting us back. In the last year, in the EV market, a lot has happened. Probably in the last 6 months, I think 10 startup EV car companies have gone public at valuations north of $50 billion. Other rural states around Oklahoma are seriously considering EV tax legislation. In Mississippi, a bill that's similar to the bill that's being introduced here today has just passed the House of Representatives. The state of Tennessee has announced a $20 million fund for EV infrastructure. Organizations and companies that have been previously against the EV industry in the last year or so are now investing billions of dollars into the space, including into EV infrastructure itself. So this is simply just to underscore the speed at which this market is accelerating. So in the last 12 months, we have built out Francis Energy, what is the first statewide comprehensive fast charging network in the country. There are 353 superchargers in the state of Oklahoma, and they are spread out very strategically every 50 miles throughout the state across about 110 to 115 sites. We built that network, for the most part, in the rural areas. So necessarily in the markets in which we are trying to develop this network, most of it is rural. So we would go into rural communities over the last 2 years based on a tax credit and offer direct current fast charging, supercharging to local communities. And we would do it at no cost, obviously, to the community because it was being funded by state tax credit legislation and our support as well. And we would go build these. And the primary or one of the great economic kind of benefits to these rural communities is by putting in a single charger, you are now solving range anxiety for those communities. And in the next 2 years, light-duty trucks and mass-market vehicles at about $35,000 with 300-plus mile ranges are going to start hitting the market in the United States. And so rural communities are going to start buying electric vehicles. And without support from the states, our concern, and this is why we are in business, is that the heartland is going to be left behind. We look at the telecommunications space and broadband infrastructure, and rural communities have been left behind. So unlike our competitors in the market, and there are a number of them, they're focused on urban areas and high corridor traffic areas. Those are important places to put EV chargers. But that does not create a contiguous network. It does not solve the range anxiety issue for rural America. So we are developing a contiguous network out from Oklahoma every 50 miles, and we're currently developing in 15 states all around the mid-continent. Kansas is a very important piece to this puzzle. We need to put charging stations all over the country every 50 miles, and the rural communities are critical to that endeavor. So to talk about the chargers just for a minute and why the rural communities are so important is because of the cost of these chargers. So these are not maybe like the chargers that you might be familiar with that are overnight charging systems that you can put at your home. You can put them at office complexes, multi-tenanted buildings. These are systems that don't cost a terrible amount of money in the grand scheme of things, and they charge your car in about 8 hours, roughly. That is not sufficient for public infrastructure. So our network and the network that a lot of our competitors are building across the country are these high-powered systems that can charge cars in 7 to 9 minutes, potentially, depending on the vehicle. They certainly have the capability of providing that charge. There are other chargers that can charge in 15 to 20 minutes, so that those might have different applications. There are other chargers that can charge in 60 minutes, and those have different applications. But they're very expensive pieces of equipment. The 10-minute charger costs about $400,000 roughly for a single dispenser. So while some businesses might be able to do that in the urban areas, there are very few small businesses in the rural communities that could afford to put in a charger. We would like to be able to go into those communities, put in those chargers, and put them onto the regional network. So with that, I will open it up for questions and apologize for being long-winded today.
Committee, any questions? I would first recognize Representative Corbett.
Thank you. Got a couple of questions for you because if you've been around here the last couple of weeks, sometimes electricity was kind of worried whether you were going to get any or not. So if you're a customer, what would it cost a customer to come to your charging station and what do you call it, like a half charge, full charge, and or what's kind of a cost factor for this?
Yeah, so on a 7 to 10 minute charger, so these are chargers you would put on public, travel stops and on the highways, certainly at the convenience stores, travel stops. You would expect to pay, just depending on the utility rate in that service territory, but it would never be more than $15, $20 for a full charge. And that means basically going from 10% to 80% is kind of considered a full charge. It would cost around that. So it's significantly less than what you'd expect from a combustion engine vehicle to fill up to get the same miles of range.
And one follow-up question. So if you're on a cooperative or Evergy, would the ratepayers have to be responsible to do the build out to get everywhere they want to go for your service?
No, so with this tax credit, that would fund the construction of this network, and any company that goes installs in those service territories would simply be buyers of electricity from the utility. So they wouldn't necessarily be putting in the capital expenditures to have to recover through the rate base. That's where companies like ours.
My last question would be, you hear this all the time, so the electric rigs, how are you going to charge for road tax or to repair the roads? I mean, how do you charge for that to keep Canvas moving on some roads?
Absolutely. So we also have today an economist that we're bringing as a proponent of this bill that will describe the economics to these charging stations and how they actually will return an economic investment to the state, and that is based on the EV driver in the state of Kansas paying their fair share for the roads. And in fact, what we have been advocating in all the 15 states that we're in, which is, I think, pretty surprising to a lot of people, is we say, look, you got to set the EV fee, whatever the methodology is, you set that EV road fee higher than what current combustion engine vehicle drivers are paying in your state. And the reason for that is it creates a great market dynamic where now the state is incentivized to encourage EV adoption because it gets paid more for that car.
Like from Kansas City to the Colorado line, every 50 miles, at least on I-70, you'd have a pull-out or a pull-over or a charging station.
That is our hope.
Thank you.
Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. Have you calculated how many stations Kansas might need, or have like that number in your mind?
So the best answer I can give you is using Oklahoma as a proxy, because we just did it. And if you consider Kansas, Oklahoma, roughly same demographics, we would probably say that the state of Kansas needs about 350 to 400 of these superchargers spread out across the state every 50 miles. But just to note, that's kind of the first phase of the evolution. You're going to have fleet conversions, small businesses and corporate, so that's also going to have to be built out. And then you're going to have heavy-duty trucks that are also going to have separate depots. Yep.
Thank you. And then just to follow up, in your testimony, you had written that I think an average person per vehicle might save $1,000 to $2,000 from EV to gas. Do you think that maybe is enough incentive or savings that they could use that to kind of build it out on their own as opposed to needing a credit? You know, if you're saving that amount.
Yeah, so, that is in fact why we are comfortable advocating for, frankly, a higher fee on EV vehicles, is simply because an EV driver is going to save between $1,000 to $2,000 considering how far they drive. And that's just a function of the state has put in an investment and has solved range anxiety and given permission to those customers to buy EVs. You've just put $1,000 back in their pocket. They can, pay an annual road fee.
Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. Last year we heard this presentation in rural revitalization, and I was very interested, so I drove down to Oklahoma, and thank you, I got to see some of these charging stations. One of them was at a motel complex just over the border, not by a casino, I just want to mention. I didn't go in there. Great facility. Went down, and there was one in a shopping center back in the corner of a Target shopping center, so that was interesting. So I think what I really am hearing, and of course I live in a rural area, and the regional network to me is the difference between what you're proposing and what anybody else is proposing, because they are going to cherry pick the prime locations. They will not have the network, the contiguous network. That's the big difference in my opinion. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so in visiting, and the number of charging stations, that number is always, my neighbor at the lake has a Tesla. He had the vision to buy some stock that I didn't, so he bought a Tesla with his profit. But he put his own charging station in, and I see they count that as a refueling station, and I can guarantee you're not going to use his charging station. So then when we go to research how many charging stations exist, the information that's available is probably skewed. So I always want to make sure people understand and get the correct information. But my final question is, carbon credits from the federal government are a big deal. We've heard about that in agriculture and things, been hearing about that for the last 10 years. Tell me what your thoughts are on carbon credits, because electric cars and feedlots are big producers of carbon, and I'm sure that's going to be part of the equation before this is over. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Representative Baker. I think there's going to be, frankly, a lot of mechanisms. I think carbon credit is one of them, for sure. But what we fear in terms of, federal stimulus that's going to be coming out, and a lot of it will be directed at electric vehicle charging stations, very little of that is going to go to rural areas. It's going to go to the urban and high corridor traffic areas. So the highways in Kansas and the major thoroughfares will get charging stations ultimately over time. The rural communities, for sure, we fear will not.
If I could just follow up a little bit off of Representative Baker's first question there. The numbers that were referenced in the fiscal note, I got onto the Department of Energy's website where you can look at the maps. I just want to make sure I've got the language correct, because when you look at the map, you can pull up Kansas, you can pull up electric stations, and there is a level 1, a level 2, a DC fast, and something called legacy chargers. According to the federal website, Kansas has 2 of the level 1, 398 of the level 2, and the DC fast, we have 33 stations. I mean, what are all those numbers? You're using the term supercharger, so how do those line up?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. What you're seeing is level 1 is just an outlet at someone's home. It's a 110 volt outlet, takes forever, 30 hours to charge a car. Level 2 are the 8-hour chargers or the overnight chargers. So you might see a residence, as an example, in Kansas that has a 220-volt outlet, maybe a dryer plug. They want to be hospitable to the EV community, and they say, hey, you can come charge here. And that goes on to a public website. So that might even be included in your level 2 numbers. I don't know. But what we're talking about here, and thank you for this, is direct current fast charging. So that's DCFC. And I believe, yes, there are 33 in the state of Kansas. I believe most of those, or probably all, were installed by 2 companies. One is Tesla, has probably a few in the state of Kansas. And then Electrify America is an organization that was built out of the Dieselgate cheating scandal, if you might remember. Volkswagen created a trust to go put in DCFC all across the country in high corridor areas, and they've done a few in Kansas. So that's what you're seeing, Chairman.
Thank you. I just want some clarification for my own edification. Make sure we were talking apples and apples. Next is Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. The superchargers, do they have a battery system in them, or you say just direct, is that 240 volts, or what's the voltage on that?
Well, the voltages are different based on the power output of the chargers. So the slowest charger that we have is a 50 kW charger that charges a car in approximately 60 to 90 minutes, depending on the vehicle. Our highest one is 400 kW output. That charges a car in 7 to 10 minutes, depending. They do not have batteries. They pull directly from the grid.
What, with the recent cold weather we've seen in southern states and even ours, what impact will that have on, I'm assuming that's going to shorten the length of miles between charges, am I correct?
I don't think it'll shorten the length of chargers necessarily. Are you referring to the?
Well, the charge, I'm assuming, wouldn't last as long in cold weather. In other words, if I normally went 100 miles, I could only go 75, correct?
That's absolutely right. And so the chargers themselves, so if you're in a super cold weather environment, that 10-minute charge might take 14 minutes. That's absolutely right, yeah.
Well, a little background. I mean, I can remember 20 years ago, I never thought of picking up a cordless drill to build a deck. And then I picked up a 7.2, and I had to charge it 4 or 5 times. Now, with a 20-volt lithium, I can do that in almost one charge. And so I guess maybe, are you guys getting ahead of your technology? Because, prices have come down on a lot of that stuff. And now I've got a bunch of 7.2 drills that, I never use.
It's a great question. We are not getting ahead of the technology. The cars have not don't have the technology yet to accept all the power that we're ready to give them. And the reason why we've future-proofed it, if you will, is because we know that batteries, the costs are coming down and the densities are getting much better, and therefore, you're going to be, charging, I think, in a much different way.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next is Representative Helgerson.
Thank you very much. I'm assuming you're a C Corp?
Correct. Well, I think we're an LLC. I don't know how we're taxed.
Okay,
Yeah.
privately held.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so how would the state get back? It's 24 million, is that right?
Yes, sir.
How do we get back our 24 million other than the telling everybody on the registration that you're going to pay this amount for this amount of miles?
Sure. So, yeah, we're an Oklahoma-based LLC. So we, as an Oklahoma company and any other foreign company coming in here, cannot avail of this tax credit that we're trying to get passed today. What we do is we come in and build it for state tax investors. So we or any other company would put together a fund with Kansas state tax investors that would take advantage of the Kansas state tax credit. So all of that investment comes from the state. The important thing to note, I think, as well, all of that investment, when you look at the construction of the sites themselves, the only thing that would go out of state from that state tax investment would probably be to the hardware providers, because there are no hardware providers currently in Kansas. So, you know, we're using companies from across the country. That's about 25% of the cost of the total project cost. That is going out. The rest stays local because all of it is local utility work, civil work, electrical, et cetera. Yeah.
But state gets back the 24 million in some way through registration. You're saying, first of all, they're tax credits, local tax credits, but those could be sold outside the state, correct?
No, that's not what we're proposing, no.
Okay. You're proposing that it's just in the state for those individuals that want to buy the tax credits.
That's absolutely right. And Representative, we have an economist that can answer a lot of these financial questions about the economic return that this tax credit will have for the state, and actually, I hope, show you the numbers on how this is advantageous. Yeah.
One quick question then, and then I'll shut up for a little bit. If I was to do a totally different market or market plan, I would draw. I know that when the demand is there, I-70 from Kansas City to 70, that's where they're going to build. From Turnpike all the way up through Wichita and through Kansas City, that's where they're going to come into place. Those are going to occur because of need, whenever there is sufficient purpose here. Why don't we cut the market down and do smaller amounts for the rest of rural Kansas so that those are used in a smaller number out in the rural areas? And why don't we use angel tax credits rather than what you're proposing? And I can hold all those rest of the questions until later to your economists, and you can have them answer that later also.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he would be better suited. Just on the kind of rural-urban divide, you know, there will be chargers in urban settings, and companies will come in here, but they're not going to come in for a very long time unless there's some incentive to do so. We're here to say, hey, we know eventually those, you know, cities are going to get chargers, but you need to put chargers out into the rural areas, and you need to do it now. You can't wait. Thank you. Yeah.
Representative Standers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. So I have a few questions. Number one, what's the average range for a typical car now?
I would say the average range is below 300. However, I think in the next 2 years, the average car will have a 300+ mile range battery in it.
At these charging stations, how many vehicles can charge at the same time?
So each dispenser or each unit has 2 dispensers. Now, that's really because there's 2 separate charges, because the Japanese cars have a standard, European, rest of world cars have a standard, and then you have the Tesla standard. Our chargers accept all cars as well as Teslas, so important to note. But there are 2 different chargers, so if 2 cars come up and they're both Japanese cars and they need the same charger, then both cannot charge on it. But otherwise, 2 cars can charge.
2 at a time. Okay, and so explain to me a little bit about what's being charged. Did I understand you to say it's not a battery?
Yeah, it literally is just pulling electricity from the grid, and it goes through transformers and rectifiers. You can clearly tell I'm not an engineer. And then it gets dispensed into the car. That's all the system is. And there's also very complicated software inside of it that controls all of this and also controls the network.
Because I had heard 4 or 5 years ago about a model where you would go to a station and you had the option of waiting there 7 or 10 or 20 minutes to get your vehicle charged, or you could have a battery just popped out that you would leave behind, and another battery that was already fully charged would be popped in, and you'd be good to go in a matter of a couple of minutes, but that system isn't like this.
You know, that's a potential market, and there's certainly, I think, a lot of applicability for what you're describing, but that market is not here yet, where you're just swapping batteries out, and that's simply, I think, because batteries are still very, very expensive. Just in the context of a car, they're coming down pretty significantly.
And finally, from the day that you really start doing this in earnest, how long do you think it'll take to get up to the 300 or 400 stations you're going to need?
So in the state of Oklahoma, it cost all in, so this is just total cost to install, about $35 to $40 million. And that was done over about a 2-year period. So assuming funding kind of keeps up, I mean, these systems can be built very, very, very quickly. The Oklahoma network, 353 chargers, was built in under 18 months.
Thank you.
Next, we have Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Part of my question was already answered in other questions, but I guess take me from, so now we've created this fund for Kansas, and then who decides the build-out, where those places are going to go, who hires the folks, whether it's you, or I assume you have competitors that are competing for the business. How does that piece come in?
So we partner with the utilities. That's how we do it, because you can't build a project without the partnership with the utility who agrees to bring out the transformers and the line extensions, et cetera. So without that partnership, we do not build projects. So we'll typically go to a utility and say, hey, where do you want chargers? And we'll match it over kind of where we think that they should be. And if they kind of match, that's where we're putting them. Of course, we also, particularly in the urban areas, we'll obviously look at things like demographics and do a little bit more modeling and try to make a more kind of careful selection of the site. But when we're talking about the rural communities, we're working with the utilities, and they more or less tell us where they go.
Okay, and one follow-up, if I could quickly. So why is it, as in testimony, it talks about GM has kind of already talked about going electric, Ford's going to go there too. So why isn't it a possibility that there would be organic growth, I think, as he alluded to, along the major corridors, but then spreading as it becomes, a build it as they come instead of a build it and they will come kind of approach?
Yeah, Tesla was the first and only manufacturer to build out their own system, and the reason for that is they had their own proprietary technology, and they don't let anyone use it. So they're willing to spend billions and billions of dollars to protect that IP. Not the same consideration for universal chargers. So, one consideration all of the OEMs have is, why am I going to spend $5 billion on a regional network that everyone's going to use anyway? So they are focused on their vehicles. At the same time, though, they're forming partnerships with EV infrastructure companies, and in the last 4 months, and certainly 2 in the last couple of weeks, these EV infrastructure companies have gone public, and they've gone public by announcing partnerships with GM and Ford to go kind of joint venture and build projects together. And so there will be some of that going on, but no single OEM is going to commit billions and billions of dollars to building out infrastructure.
I wasn't suggesting it would be that way, just it would be a competitive market that would build them out as the demand drove for those.
Okay, so if I may, you're raising a great point about the need for this public-private partnership. And the reason for that is just the economics of these charging stations simply don't permit private capital to put in 100% of the equity. There will never be a return on that investment. So to build out a network, it's really a true public-private partnership to make it happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One final question, Representative Corbin.
So after listening to you, so all these small towns in Kansas, if you've got a convenience store there or Casey's or something now, what would it cost the franchise or the owner put one, if you could get one station in each town, just kind of a ballpark price or something like that?
So, you know, convenience stores are very unique. I'm not in the business, but, you know, they typically prefer a lot of rapid turnover in their stores. And so they don't want necessarily a charging system that's 20 or 40 minutes because that's not really their business model. So, you know, what convenience stores may need is a 10-minute charger, which more aligns maybe with their business model. That single unit might cost $400,000. So the bigger convenience stores can certainly afford it, the smaller ones cannot.
That's kind of the same way with broadband. I can't say that half of Kansas doesn't have good broadband, but there's a lot of areas right now, even close to this Capitol building, where it's not that we don't want it, it's just there's not enough people here to pay the freight to make all these things work. So, thank you.
Committee, I think we'll wrap up questions for this conferee. We'll go ahead and move on. Thank you for your testimony today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee, very much.
Committee, I want to pause for just a moment and return to the fiscal note. Representative Highland had made a point that I would like to address. If Kathleen, if you're still on and listening, Representative Highland, do you want to ask your question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question is, the last paragraph of the fiscal note, you talk about the insurance company and they're wanting their tax credit in this too. Would you explain how that works and what that means?
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm sorry. I was trying to listen to another committee at the same time, and that's not a good thing. I can't do that. Representative Highland, your question was with regarding the last paragraph. Is that correct?
Yes, in the insurance department, I don't understand how they would be involved.
Well, I believe that the bill does allow for insurance companies to qualify. Let me look here real quick. Yeah, the way the bill is written, it is allowing insurance companies to claim a credit against the premiums tax return.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That might be something we look at further with the revisor's office as well. Okay, thank you, committee. We will return to our proponent testimony. In the interest of time, I think we will go through our final verbal proponents, and then we will take questions at the end for each one of those as you wish to address them. So next up, I have Dr. Joseph Hasleg, Professor of Economics with the University of Missouri. Welcome to committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for allowing someone from Missouri, an economist from Missouri, into your chamber. So I appreciate that. I have conducted a kind of a quantitative assessment of the economic impact of this investment on the state of Kansas economy, and I can summarize it in kind of the following ways. Because this investment will take a couple of years to undertake, as Mr. Jankowski indicated, and because it's going to reap rewards over a number of future years, I looked out over the next 20 years. I took those future payments, those future streams of payments, and discounted to what they're worth today. And I can summarize it in the following ways. Basically, the extra real GDP that will be generated in the state of Kansas is going to be something on the order of just less than $220 million over the next 20 years. As that tax base expands in the state of Kansas, so will general revenues collected by the state. My projections are that will yield about a little over $14 million in additional general revenues for the state. Earlier on, someone asked a question about what the impact was of altering the tax structure since EVs will not be using gas taxes. I considered a case where each electric vehicle, each EV, is charged an annual user fee, for lack of a better term, of about $150 a year. And that alone over the next 20 years would, in Kansas, at the projected rate of EV adoption, would add a little more than $80 million in extra revenues for the state of Kansas. So just adding together the $80 million in user fees and the extra $14 million in general revenue funds collected, I was computing this off of a tax credit of roughly $30 million, and I was coming up at 5.9%. What I heard you gentlemen talking about a few minutes ago is the tax credit will be more like 24 million rather than 30. I haven't done that calculation, but needless to say, if you make the denominator smaller, the return on investment is going to go up. And this is really comparable to the rate of return that you're going to get on a over the last 80 years if you were to invest $1 in the stock market and hold it for a long period of time. That average rate of return is about 7%. If you're interested, the greenhouse gas emissions that would be saved over the next 20 years would be worth, just the carbon dioxide emission savings would be worth about $325 million in savings because of these electric vehicle adoptions. I think this is going to come up, so let me preempt this just a little bit and then I'll finish my testimony. The problem that exists here is that this infrastructure in the electric vehicle charging stations amounts to a kind of public good. And consequently, there's a coordination failure. So someone asked about why wouldn't this occur organically? Why wouldn't the market solve this problem? As an economist, I would generally believe that markets are going to find ways, but in this case, we've got a market failure. That's what that coordination failure is. And the market failure boils down to the following economic intuition. People are not going to buy electric vehicles unless they have ready access to charging stations that get over this range anxiety issue that Mr. Jankowski spoke of. So they're not going to buy EVs. On the other hand, suppliers of these charging stations are not going to build out on their own because there are not electric vehicles to use them. So consequently, there's almost like a chicken and egg coordination failure that's affecting the market. And as public infrastructure and this public-private partnership works together, that's the way to kind of solve this and build out the network. That's the end of my testimony. I'll allow other people to speak and be prepared for questions as you will.
Thank you, Professor. We appreciate that. Our next conferee is our legislative peer from Oklahoma, the Oklahoma State Legislature. We'd like to welcome to committee the Honorable Representative Scott Fettgater. Can you hear us, Scott?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, sir. Welcome to
All
committee.
right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee. It's an honor today as you're in session and we're in session to be invited to testify before you today on this issue that is, in my mind, critical. My name is Scott Feckgetter. I am in my third term in the Oklahoma House. I represent House District 16, which is just south of Tulsa. I am the chairman of the Rev and Tax Finance Committee in the House, and have been one of the champions on the EV side of things in the Oklahoma House, and happy to talk about the need, as the speaker said just before myself, you really do. You have the chicken and the egg issue, and it's important that you do have the public-private partnership. I've worked with several different EV companies through this. The way our tax incentive works in Oklahoma is we have a 75%. I worked on this in 2019. We had a 75% tax for incentive for infrastructure, 45% for the automobile side, and just today that tax credit sunset last year, and today I passed through committee again House bill allowing for that 75% tax credit. And the reason why is because it's important, especially being in a rural area such as my district is, that we make sure that as the OEMs continue to roll out more and more vehicles, I believe Ford F-150, for example, will roll out in the next year, year and a half, total electric vehicle. And in my part of the country, the Ford F-150 that is a very popular vehicle, as I am sitting along I-40 right now in a Ford F-150. You also have Lordstown Trucks, company that I've met with that are looking at, potentially locating part of their business into Oklahoma. And so I think it's important for us to understand that as the OEMs continue to roll out more and more electric vehicles, as a conservative Republican, there's this battle over this green energy, new Green Deal and those kinds of political issues that get thrown at us. And the reality of it is the electric vehicle is coming. It's not slowing down. It's going to continue to increase more and more and more over the next 10 years. And we have to, in my opinion, as a legislator, it's my responsibility to make sure that as more, there was a mention earlier about people choosing to buy EV over the next 10 years. I think that choice becomes less and becomes more of a demand, that you're not going to be able to buy as many combustion engines as you are EV. You're not going to have as many options. So I've worked on this. We've built out a large infrastructure at this point, and we're going to continue doing that as well. Along with the bill that I passed out of committee today, we're taking a little bit of a different approach on the annual fee or the tax for electric vehicles. As as combustion engines slow and EV ramps up, you have to have that revenue replacement for your roads and bridges. And so it's important to us to make sure that that's equitable as best we can. So what we're doing, we're taking a little different approach, and we're building a tax structure that is wrapped around the class of vehicles. So for example, if you drive an F-350, you would pay one type of or 1% of tax, or if you drove an F-150, that would be a different class of vehicle. So we're looking at this from a little different perspective. We've gotten a little bit of pushback from some of the larger EV companies. Tesla, for example, they don't like it because they want us to be standard like other states on the tax. But most importantly, in my district alone, I think I have about 5 of these charging stations around my district. And it's interesting because as they pop up, of course, my conservative constituents are wanting to know why are we having these EV stations pop up, and I tell them it's because at some point in the near future, EV is going to be, what you're going to be choosing for a vehicle. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to answer any questions from the committee.
Representative, out of respect for the representative's time, it sounds like he's stopped along the highway. I would take questions for the representative at this time so he can get back on the road if he needs to. Are there any specific questions? Representative Corbett.
Sir, thanks for coming in and giving us an update. Can you kind of give me a rough estimate of how many electrical vehicles you have registered in Oklahoma today?
Thank you for that question. Representative Corbett, I am not sure of that exact number. I've kept a closer eye on the number of stations we're building out on the infrastructure because we currently don't have a fee for electric vehicles. So I'm not sure. I could certainly get with OTC and see if they have any data on that number, but I am not aware of what it is because we don't have anything to identify that in our tax law at this time.
Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony, Scott. Do you know what the utilization rate today is of the charging stations in your area? Like of those 5, how often they're used?
Thank you for that question. I don't know the exact utilization rate, but I will tell you that it's very, very minimal at best. Muskogee Creek Nation, however, they have a couple of stations out there, tribal complex, where they are using, I believe they're Francis's charging stations. There are, and there are other companies that are built out across the state, but I cannot tell you, but it is fairly minimal right now, which brings up the important issue that, we can't allow, the vehicle, the demand to outpace over the next, 10 years, the amount of stations available for those charges, for those charging station opportunities. The other thing I would like to mention, I apologize for interrupting, is because it is, we're accustomed to pulling up to a fuel pump and taking, 5 minutes or less to fill up our pickup or our car. It is important that, you consider as the infrastructure is built out, these stations should be in areas where they can draw people in to eat at restaurants or shop at local businesses and those types of things. So it's a little different thought process as to how those stations should be located throughout the state.
Representative, this is Chairman Smith. I appreciate your last comments, because when we strategically locate these things, it does take into account that we are changing consumer behavior a little bit. So I appreciate that. I did have one question directly related to your language in your state statute. Currently, our bill that is proposed, we've talked a lot about rural communities and trying to expand these out into the underserved areas. Is there anything in your language that specified a certain mileage distance or a certain area where these would qualify? Because there's nothing in our bill, and I'm just curious if there was any competition to where this money was intended to go into building the infrastructure in rural areas, but did some of it get used to put up those urban and the interstate corridor stations?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. It's a really important question, and the answer is no. We don't have anything specific in our language as to where the stations would go. Now, I will tell you, I have worked a lot, really, really close with Francis, is the one, the company that I've worked closest with, I would say. And they have been very good to keep me informed on their mapping. And they have been very good to make sure that those stations are located, because as a rural legislator, that was really important to me, was, in my district, what's going to make sure that we have a charging station in my district, and not just a charging station, but a high kilowatt, station, a rapid charge station. And they've been very good to help or to allow me into those conversations as to where these locations should be, where, how far apart those high charge, fast charge, quick charge stations would be. So I've just had a really good relationship and experience with them on that.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any further questions? Seeing none, Representative, thank you very much for joining us today, and we appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, committee, thank you for your time.
Our next conferee is Becky Schwartz with Fuel True Independent Fuel and Convenience.
It's a mouthful, believe me. Thank you. I am Becky Schwartz. I'm the Associate Executive Director for Fuel True Independent Energy and Convenience. We represent the convenience stores in the state of Kansas, and I'll be brief because I'm sure there's lots of questions. Our members are starting to change and to look into their business models to incorporate alternative fueling stations, charging stations. But we're in the beginning stages of it. And you've heard from other conferees that it's a process. Building the infrastructure is one of the steps. Another step, though, is to actually be able to charge for that electricity. And we actually have a bill, House Bill 2145, that is passed out of the House Utilities that is going to allow that. So there's multiple steps in order for our members to be able to charge and to have this infrastructure. And to answer Representative Corbett's question, we actually have one member right now that is in the process of adding these to his station along I-70. And he says, and I gotta look at my numbers, I scribbled, 150,000 to 200,000 for 200 kilowatt. That's just the unit. That's not labor, anything like that. And that's gonna keep you at the convenience store for about 30 minutes, approximately. He's looking at more, but they're upwards of $750,000 just for those units. So, like I said, it's a process for our BIPers, and they're looking into it, but we've got to go through steps. We hope that this bill will give them an incentive to stay ahead of the demand so we can build this border to border. And with that, Chairman, I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Committee, I show no further verbal proponents. Is there anyone else wishing to appear as a verbal proponent? Seeing none, we will reopen the questions. I will open it up for any of the proponent testimony. Are there any further questions? Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Full questions today. This is for Becky. Should be pretty simple. Just to clarify, you said it's 200,000 per unit. So if I think of it like a gas pump, that'd be like 1 unit. So if you wanted 10, it'd be 200.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Representative Day. Representative Blex, you are first in the queue, and then Representative Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure who to address this question to, but if we get a $400,000 and a 75% tax credit, and that leaves roughly, in my simple mind, $100,000, what kind of data do you have that would be payoff on those things? 5 years, 10 years? Does anybody have any data on what kind of a payoff on the investment?
The answer is it all depends on the utilization of the charger. So as Representative Feckgetter was, I think, telling us in his testimony, the utilization rates of the chargers in Oklahoma, and we have this data, it's below 1%. So currently at a 1% utilization rate, there is no return on a $100,000 investment. However, if utilization rates get to about 5 to 7%, and this is very generically speaking because it depends on a lot of factors, but around 5 to 7%, they start to break even. And at about 10 to 12%, they start to cash flow positively. That's also a reason why a single, a company that's going to put in a single charger in a rural area, the economic benefits will never be there. It's simply because we're building out a network that we can, quite frankly, absorb a few chargers in some low utilization areas because of other chargers that are effectively subsidizing it. But I hope that answered.
Yes, that answers it well, and I understand that completely because I farm. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't, Mr. Jenk, I think you're probably the person who's going to answer this question for me. I'm building a home right now, and one of the things we were considering was future electric car purchases that we're probably going to be doing further down the road. We looked into installing the electric to handle that, and it's cost a lot of money. It added a lot to our electric bill, the budget that we had. We didn't wind up doing it. So I'm just wondering if this would, it's kind of like what we do now. We don't have gas stations in our homes. Would we be taking our car down the street to fill it up there the same way that we do with our gas now? Or are we envisioning, and maybe you know this in Oklahoma, and perhaps Representative Baker knows this better too, or other people who know people, are people in general having the electricity installed, the capabilities installed in their homes when they're purchasing electric cars too? How is that working out right now? Thank you.
So Representative, great question. So the immediate kind of answer is that most people that are acquiring EVs today can afford a $1,500 home charging system at their home. That is not going to be the case, particularly when these cars become much more affordable. What a public charging place in your town does is it eliminates the need to go purchase a $1,500 to $2,000 charging system at your home.
Representative Baker.
Thank you for a second time, and thank you for your presentation. So ever since I went to Oklahoma and observed these, I've been doing a lot of research and talking to people. We know we're going electric. You know, I remember, you know, I'm really old, but I remember when nobody had one of these, 20 years. And we didn't build cell phone towers out very fast either. And that was a really bad deal, really bad deal. We need to be in front of this instead of behind it. This is, yeah, I mean, the cell phone's really important. My kids can't live without one. I think I'd do really well without one. But I really need my car. So I really think we need to be in front of it. The rural electric companies where I live, this is their future. We're obviously going to go electric. They sell electricity. They need that volume. They need that increased purchasing of electricity. But it looks to me like the network, and I think that's the real key. The metro areas, they probably already have those charging stations, not to a sufficient number yet, but they're getting there. It's those of us in the rural areas, everybody who's in towns of less than 75,000 people. We're probably the ones that are really, really in need of this. And I think the key to your program and your presentation is the network. And I think can't enforce that enough. But you know, that's kind of what I've seen. That's what I've observed. So thank you.
Did you wish to respond to that? Or I didn't know if there was a question.
Just to thank the representative, that's all.
Committee, are there any further questions for any of the conferees? Representative Helgerson.
I'm sorry, I still have a lot of questions, and I'll just ask one. If the state's going to put up all the money, why don't we just own the network? Because then when the time comes that we want to sell it and becomes profitable, then we sell it to Exxon or some other corporation in the future.
I would probably respond to that simply to say owning and operating charging stations is a very, very difficult thing to do that we're discovering. And the reason for that is mostly because of the software that's inside of it. And the software is what drives everything. It's a very complicated thing to own a network. And if a state is going to own it, that's great, but then you necessarily might not get the amplifying effects of having a network in other states. But the question is well understood.
To that nature, I think you'd alluded to the fact that it was Mississippi that you just passed similar legislation in. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we actually were just made aware. So the state of Mississippi passed legislation very similar. Obviously, there's differences, but very similar in terms of the nature of the credit, which is 75%. It is capped, you know, on a yearly basis over 3 years, I believe, in Mississippi. That just passed the House of Representatives, I think, by 90 to 20 votes. So we're hopefully pretty confident it's going to get passed. The state of Tennessee just announced $20 million directed specifically at direct current fast chargers, so not level 2s. In Arkansas, we're very encouraged at the state of play in Arkansas in terms of legislation and other public funding in Arkansas that's going to be available. The state of Alabama, we're very encouraged, is going to do something this year in some form. So we are very, very hopeful that 2021, we are going to be able to start building in the rural communities in the mid-continent and start the process in 21. It's going to be a very small sliver of overall of what's required, but it's a start.
And my point of my question is, in these states that it either has passed and become law, or it's passed committee or a chamber or being considered, are they all at that 75% ratio? And if not, talk a little bit about, what that would look like if it was only 50%.
Sure. So they're at 75%, and there's a very specific reason for it. So if you look at the VW kind of funds and how they've been allocated in every state and how they're being dispersed, they're mostly dispersed at 75 to 80% of total project cost. And that's simply because of kind of the economics of charging stations. You simply can't recover your capital if you're not getting at least 75% of it covered from some other public source. And that's just the nature of these direct current fast charging stations. They're such expensive pieces of equipment, and it's not like the cost of them are really going to go down over time. They might because of volume, but they're certainly not going to go down too much because of the technology, because there really isn't much technology in it. It's just taking electricity from the grid and putting it through a transformer and rectifier and back out into a car. So these prices are going to stay pretty high. And so to build out a public network is going to require some sort of public investment.
We have a question online. Representative Stogsdill, I apologize. I just noticed that. I hope you haven't had your hand up for hours and hours.
No, I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is kind of a technology question. Maybe I misunderstood this, but I thought I heard that someone say that these stations could go from $400,000 to $750,000 for a fast charging unit. Is that correct?
No, not correct. So the fastest charging system that exists today is about a 400 kW system. That unit, all installed, so that includes the electrical transformers, all the civil works, the pads, the full project cost, is about $400,000. When you put the second dispenser at that site, obviously, you've already put in all the costs in the infrastructure, so it's really just the cost of that second unit, which is probably around $150,000 roughly. Maybe more, maybe $200,000.
Would that technology be encased in that same charging unit at that point? That was my other question, was these charging units, can they only charge one car at a time?
No, so they're capable of charging 2 cars at a time because they have 2 hoses per dispenser, but those hoses are 2 different plugs. So if the same car or 2 cars with the same plug pull up to the same dispenser, only 1 car can use it. But if it's an alternative car with a different plug, then it can use that dispenser.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Committee, any further questions? Going once, going. Thank you. Thank you again for your testimony. Thank you to all the conferees. Committee, I will draw your attention to written-only testimony from Kelly Gilbert, Executive Director with Metropolitan Energy Center, Tammy Alexander, Senior Program Coordinator with the Central Kansas Clean Cities, and Doug Shepard, Vice President of Management Consulting Services and Kansas Electric Cooperatives. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on behalf of House Bill 2317? Committee, I show no opponent or neutral testimony. Is there anyone wishing to appear as an opponent or neutral? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2317. Committee, we have just a few moments here. I want to pause. I told you yesterday, we kind of have a new system of sharing our committee documents, testimony, fiscal notes, the notes from the reviser. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen here and just do a brief couple-minute review. We'll see if this works. I've never done this before. There we go. Committee, there is something new called the S drive. I think it's, if you see it on your computer, it's called the number 4 committees. And to access that, if you'll go down into your search bar at the very bottom left-hand corner, the easiest way to get there is to type S colon, and hit enter. It will bring up a new shared directory that we have for the House and Senate committees. All you have to do is go up to House and double click on that. Taxation, unfortunately, is way down there at the bottom. Double click on that, and it will bring up by date all of the committee documents. At the very top, we have the committee rules for this year. I'll go into this first folder that was from February 16th. On the 16th, we had a hearing on House Bill 2186. You'll see all of the information there from 2186, along with the informational briefing we had from the Secretary of Revenue at the bottom. So if you know what date we're on, if you're wanting to pull up documents while we're in committee working a bill, we can do that. There's also another handy feature I wanted to show you. Anytime you're in this folder, you can go up to the top right-hand corner where it says search, and it'll say, right now it says search taxation because I'm in the taxation folder. If you click on that, let's say I want to learn more about Senate Bill 13. It's been a while since we looked at that. You can type in SB 13, or if it's a House bill, HB 2317, hit enter, and it'll automatically search through all of those folders and pull up all the documents, all the testimony, the fiscal note, everything that we had on Senate Bill 13. So if we're working a bill and you have your laptop in front of you, it's really easy to pull up all of those documents that way if you can't remember necessarily what date we worked that on. But that's a new system we're going to use. Our distinguished committee assistant loves it. It's very convenient, and I think it'll be very beneficial. It'll be very easy to use. But does anybody have any questions on our new process? We will probably not be emailing out any more documents. It will all be on this S drive. Representative Baker.
Mr. Chairman, could you email those directions out on how to access that, please?
Well, we are recorded live, so you can always come back and listen to it.
I could archive. Thank you.
We will put something together and send it out via email for some directions. Representative Burkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will there be an email notification when the documents are available, or do we just have to go out and check periodically for when they're uploaded out there?
Everything will be up around 12 noon the day of the test, or the day of the hearing, or
Thank you.
The meeting. And I will say that this is only available to legislators. This is not a public drive. There's some security issues there. So this is just to distribute information to the legislators and committee assistants, office assistants. Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is in regards to amendments. Those will still be emailed out to us throughout committee, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Any further questions? If not, we can give that a try. We've got a few minutes here. I wanted to take a look at a couple of bills today that were fairly basic, and I hope that doesn't give them the kiss of death. But House Bill 2313, we heard just yesterday regarding the National Guard reservist property tax exemption on vehicles. And let me stop sharing my screen here, and I will turn it over to Adam with the Revisor's Office to give us an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, you pretty much summed up the bill. House Bill 2313 would allow Kansas National Guard and reservist members who are in good standing to qualify for the property tax exemption for up to 2 motor vehicles. As I stated earlier yesterday, currently these individuals are not eligible for the property tax exemption which exists in statute. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any questions for the revisor? Seeing none, what are your wishes on House Bill 2313? Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that we pass out House Bill 2313 favorably.
Thank you. And a second from Representative Kelly. Any discussion, committee? Okay, seeing none, apologize for that, committee. Representative Gartner, you may close.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would also ask that we contemplate putting this bill on the consent calendar.
Is that an official motion?
That is
Okay.
an official motion.
Does the second concur with that? Okay. Committee, you've heard the motion by Representative Gartner to pass House Bill 2313 favorably for passage and place it on the consent calendar. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The other bill I wanted to take a look at was House Bill 2315. This was the tax credit for contributions to technical colleges. And committee, I'm aware that we just heard this one on Tuesday, so I will ask if there's any objection, if there's any amendments that people were working on. I do not want to push this one through right now. So is there any objection to working House Bill 2315? Seeing none, I will go ahead and turn it over to the reviser for an overview of 2315.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2315 would essentially reinstitute the higher education deferred maintenance tax credit for contributions to technical college for contributions that are used for capital improvements, deferred maintenance, or the purchase of technology or equipment. The credit would be used to offset either the income tax, premium tax, privilege fees, or privilege tax. The credit would be applicable for tax years 2021 through 2025 as a refundable credit. The tax credits on the limits on the tax credit would be not more than $500,000 per taxpayer per year, not more than $500,000 worth of tax credit to a single technical college per year, and not more than $3,500,000 in total tax credits in any tax year that the credit remains in effect. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you. Committee, are there any questions for the reviser? Representative Helgerson.
Mr. Chairman, I can't remember. Was that 100% tax credit, dollar for dollar, or was it 70 or 80? Because we got into that discussion.
I believe it was 100%.
Okay. Thank you.
Was that correct, Adam?
That is my recollection. I'm pulling up real quick. Yes, I don't see the limitation like they used to exist. So it would be 100%. The credit would be a full credit.
Representative Mason says that's included in the fiscal note. I was looking through the bill and didn't see it right offhand, but yes, so it is 100%. Any further questions for the reviser? Seeing none, committee, what are your wishes with House Bill 2315? Chair recognizes Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the committee recommend House Bill 2315 favorable for passage.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second from Representative Baker. Further discussion? Representative Helgerson.
I know we talk about it as tax credits, as 100%. This is our state general fund dollars just being given out for individuals to make a decision on their own programming. It may be a great idea, but at the same time, we have long conversations about how we spend the tax dollars that we receive through appropriations. What we're making a decision is that we're turning over the control of how we give our money and how it's spent to the local communities and to the local technical colleges. And I can almost guarantee that there will be other individuals who will be wanting the same things. And we can't fund right now higher ed. We can't fund the technical colleges, the community colleges, and the regents on the funding we have. So when you do this kind of a project, you're making a decision that you're going to give the money to the locals, they'll make the decision, and we won't have the resources to do the 20%. And we heard earlier from students, but also from the universities, how they are short of money and we need to give them more money. You can't spend the money twice. So you're either going to give this away or you're going to give it in some other way to the regents and to the community colleges and the technical colleges with possibly an organized plan about how you're going to spend the money. Here you're making all the decisions right now that everybody's on their own if they can raise the money. And there is a limited amount of tax credits and SGF that we have available. I know I'm speaking to, I know I'm probably the only one that's going to be against this, but I'm just warning you. You all got a summary of where we are in the profiles of how much money we have and how our future looks. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to voting for this. This provides a tax credit to incentivize private dollars to go towards something that the state doesn't fund in the first place. So I look forward to voting yes.
Representative Corbett.
Following up on the other representative's question, this will not affect your property tax, or does it eventually affect raising property taxes? Does anybody have an answer to that?
This is strictly an income tax credit. Yeah, shouldn't affect or impact property taxes at all. Any further questions? Seeing none, Representative Mason, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll renew my motion to recommend House Bill 2315 favorable for passage.
Thank you. Committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion carries. Committee, thank you for your time and attention. We had a little bit longer meeting today, but no meeting tomorrow.